So, Matt, now before you start teaching, you want to identify your learning goals, your learning standards, and you want to create a performance task.
Right.
Tell us about what standards you were going to teach and what your specific goals were for the students to be able to do and understand.
Well, this assignment is looking at Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So I went through and picked some focus standards. One being primarily, I really value the permanence of a text and how, especially in American lit, going back to the 17th century and 18th centuries, that we don't leave those in the past. So one standard I looked at here analyzes these foundational documents of our past. So using Sinners then to look at what it reveals about society and at history and how that's then seen through writing.
So that's reading for informational text, standard 8.
Yes. And then another one is looking at the author's point of view and purpose. I'm really big on looking at the purpose. Why was this written? And then why, 200, 300 years later, are we still looking at it? So what kind of purpose does it then value at the time and us now? Was another standard, standard 6 here.
Reading for information, 6. And that's an important standard, especially in the upper grades, because it's not just about looking at, well, what's the author's purpose? To inform, to persuade.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is his main message, what messages are implicit, which messages are explicit, and also where does the author's bias? Where is that in there?
Because with that we often assume like these general things that your purpose is to inform, but you're very generalizing. So looking at sinners, what if you're not a sinner? What if who else is Jonathan Edwards talking to? That purpose is different, and he's going to reach that audience differently too. So got to look at that as well. So
it looks like you've got 2 standards focusing on analyzing primary sources, analyzing they call them foundational documents, which is really key because when you do that, your text complexity is very high, and we know this is a high text complexity, so that's actual standard 10. And then you also want them to be able to analyze and break down, and I think what I hear you say is evaluate how the author persuades or makes an argument, and sort of determine the quality of that argument and what tools is the author using and how does he employ them. So from that, how were you going to assess whether students could do those things?
After multiple days of study, the then final assessment at the end of the picture was then to them write an analytical paper, an argumentative analysis of what Edwards did in his text through figurative language and through rhetoric. Was then the final kind of culminating assessment at the end of all this.
Could you read the performance task?
It asked the students, how does Jonathan Edwards persuade his audience in his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? And then it asked them to analyze which argumentative techniques they feel would have been the most successful with his Puritan audience in colonial America. And then specifically to use direct evidence from the text to examine Edwards' use of figurative language and rhetoric in their analysis.
I'm just going to pause for a second. As you watch the video, you're likely watching this in a Prezi, and in the Prezi you'll see all the documents that we talk about, either right before our video or right after. We'll zoom to the documents. And you can download them from the georgiastandards.org website. So they're all everything we talk about will be available to you. So looking at this, where would you say are the key sort of assessments that you're going to be you really want students to focus on and are going to determine whether they're able to do what you want them to do?
Several. The one here is, which techniques that they choose in terms of success. So that kind of personalization. What are my students picking out that they find is successful in the context of then the Puritan audience?
So they have to be able to pick strong examples of persuasive and argumentative techniques.
Right. And then they have to then use that evidence correctly and effectively within their paper, but then the most important is not just identifying and discussing, but then the evaluation part. What is it in this sentence, in this passage that you're evaluating of Edwards? The figurative language, the rhetoric behind it, those really deeper kind of intricacies of it for them to evaluate why this connection or why this appeal is being made, and then how that is going to make Edwards then effective.
Why is this an effective appeal? What makes it effective? Why would this audience
be affected by
it, or why would certain people not be affected by it? So that why question, how does it affect the audience, and how does he use language to make his point? It's going far beyond just identify. They do have to be able to identify rhetorical devices. Then they have to be able to explain why they're effective or why they're not effective.
And then you've got the two parts of the audience that you're looking at, to the sinners that he's targeting for a specific purpose, and then those that are more devout and are more compliant. Are the same appeals being made to both
people?
So looking at that,
and how does he appeal to two different audiences at the same time?
Right.
So in our next section, we're going to start looking at how you help the students read, because this is a very complex text with a lot of complex syntax. So how do you help them comprehend and then do the close reading?